Greece has an ancient tradition of fearsome gods, and Dionysus was one of them. Dionysus was the god of wine and fertility, but he demanded blood sacrifice. Although the ancient cult of Dionysus has long since died, some speculate that some secret sects still survive on the more isolated Greek islands. And this theory, it may explain what happened to two young UCLA students, Janie Mitchell and Ray Silver, while in Mykonos. On the 22nd of March in 2023, they climbed into an unknown tour boat that took them to an island. It was an island called Tavros. It doesn't exist on any maps, and their destination could only be described as a bloody horror. Some cults have strange prayers or believe in strange gods. It's just our luck. We managed to come face to face with the darkest cult of all, one with a taste for an offering that is not only taboo, but horrifying. Human flesh. This is how it happened. I had screwed up royally. And in hangover haze, we jumped on the wrong tour boat. If only I realized then that being lost off the coast of Greece was the least of our worries. The captain was this dour-faced man. The only answer that we could get about where we were going was Tavros. My grandmother was from Athens and had taught me the basics of Greek. It meant bull, I think. My Greek was really rusty though. My yaya had passed on when I was still small. But when we arrived at that island, the sea had turned from aquamarine to a bruised shade of brinjal. There were none of those bright lights that we expected of the Greek tourist isles. This village loomed in front of us, dark and silent. We stood on that jetty. There were old houses melded into the island, and their pale, whitewashed walls were like tombstones in the shadows of the cliff. The captain stood in front of us. He wore a chain with a cross and a strange pressed symbol of a bull's head. Is he a tourist and proud or what? I remember thinking that. I just wish I knew what that despicable horn symbol was really hiding. 100 euros, he said. Dio. He held up 2 fingers. I didn't argue. I had 200 euros in my belt, but I was still worried, because it left me with only 80 euros for the entire night. Hotel. Where? Where is hotel? I asked in growing panic. He gazed at me in silence. I mimed sleeping by putting clasped hands under the side of my face, and he pointed to this old house right on its own at the cliff's edge some ways up. He stared at Janie, and he made a sign of the cross, and he kissed the medallion on his chain, and then he just strode away into the darkness. I felt those stirrings of unease in the pit of my stomach. Janie was fumbling at her shirt, trying to cover herself in this chill, and I drew her closer to me, trying to warm her. I chatted, I made light of our predicament, but inside I was a tangle of fears. We walked up the winding streets, house after shuttered house, in an eerie hush. We passed under the shadow of a looming building and had this large iron cross jutting from its roof. It was some kind of old church, and beneath it was a white slab of stone. Painted in thick red and black slashes was a painting of a horned bull. When Janie moved her cell light to the base of the stone, she let out this small shriek. Under the eye, in a shallow stone trough, was a stinking pile of rotten meat. Intestines lay curled around like purple, shiny coils. I drew Janie to my chest, and I navigated my way around the shrine, pulling her along, hurrying away from that sickening sight. Janie was whimpering. What the fuck was that, Ray? What the fuck was that? I don't know, Jan. I couldn't lie, but I pictured all kinds of painful and gory endings just for us. And as we drew closer to the house that the captain had pointed out, we were relieved to see lights pouring yellow from between the shutters. The place looked old. The whitewash flaked off the haphazard stone walls like an insect, molting off an enormous carapace. And above this old oak door was the picture of a hand, palm out, and in the center, the same head of the bull from that church. The knocker was some strange animal with the tongue curling beneath it, and I knocked sharply. Janie stood next to me, her head turning off into the dark streets just behind us. No response. Well, I knocked harder then. I couldn't fight that feeling that something was watching us. It was creeping up on us from behind. We saw this shadow pass by the upstairs blinds and make its way downstairs. It was this fumbling of locks. Why so many locks, I thought, in this tiny island village? An old woman stood, framed by the glow of several gas lights in the room behind her. I am sorry to intrude, I began in my broken Greek. I speak English, but only a little. Come inside, she said in a scratchy voice. She ushered us into this dusty, cramped sitting room. She was tiny, bird-boned, and as old as the hills. And even her wrinkles seemed to have wrinkles. And deep within her dark skin, her eyes shone out in this striking rings of blue. She wore a monstrous black dress that seemed 4 sizes too big for her. And her tiny, puckered-up lips were painted over in a garish gash of red lipstick. Welcome to my home, she smiled, her lipless smile revealing these dark, crooked teeth. The ghost breath of her white hair was scraped up into a sparse bun. She gestured this blue-veined hand toward a stained settee, and all around this craggy, whitewashed room were crosses. Some had the twisted form of Jesus hanging, eyes upturned in agony. And on a separate stand was a statue of a bull, mottled bronze. What the hell is it with bulls on this crazy island? I kept thinking. Oh my, you are a handsome one, she crooned at me. But you are too thin, she told my Janie. In my day, I had curves like a real woman. And her bony hand ran across the oversized velvet dress. This old lady is not playing with a full deck of cards, I thought. She let out this reek of mothballs and lavender and something else, very unpleasant. I forget myself. My name is Mrs. Likos. You are very welcome to my humble home. Well, thank you so much. I am Ray, and this is Janie. Are there any cars or ferries or a phone? We need to get back to Mykonos. Our friends will be very worried, I kept telling her. Mrs. Likos let out a creaky cackle, and her bony hand fidgeted with something, this long beaded rosary and a bright gold medallion. Oh no, she said. In the morning, I will ask Tony to take you back to shore, but that will be after church. You stay here. You know, it's not safe to be outside at night. Not safe? Janie asked. What is the, Now I'll show you to your room, the old lady spoke over Janie. She led us through a living area crammed to the ceiling with millions of trinkets, religious figurines, this age-yellowed lace. The roof beams were so low that I had to stoop to fit through that doorway. And we walked through a narrow corridor to one of the 3 doors. She opened the door with a flourish. The room was tiny, with an old dark wood bed and a white covering that showed blooms of old scrub stains, probably blood stains. I immediately shut down that dark train of thought, though. There were several more crucifixes above the bed. While you settle in, I will prepare for you some special Greek dinner, yes? Oh, no, really, it's so late. We don't want to put you out, Janie countered. Rubbish. I must feed my guests as it is the Greek way of hospitality. She cut Janie off. And then she reached out and she touched my face, and I couldn't help but recoil from her touch. A look of malice briefly crossed her face, but was replaced by that rotted-toothed smile. Enough chitter-chatter. Let me feed you, children. You must be starving, no? That awful smile again made my stomach lurch in my belly and my flesh pucker into goosebumps. I will prepare a special local dish from my sainted mother's recipe. She made a sign of a cross over her withered chest. She clapped her hands together girlishly, which gave an unsettling feeling with her ravaged face. Give me an hour, and I will prepare you some traditional hospitality. You go settle. So long. Then the crazy woman turned to me and blew me an extravagant kiss. We lay next to each other on the bed. Our laughter died out in our growing unease. Like me, Janie avoided speaking about how terrified she was of that little old lady, lest speaking her fears would start to make them real. I wish we had just trusted our gut. Janie and I whispered in the cramped room, staring at our useless cell phones with no reception and a dwindling charge. We heard a commotion from down the hall. It was shouts and bangs and something heavy falling around, and then the old lady's raised voice. This sound of a fevered praying swelled loudly down the narrow hall. Should I go check if Mrs. Lycos is okay? I whispered. No, Janie said with her eyes wide. Don't. Her beautiful green eyes were dark with untold fear. Then the smell of the burnt meat and the acrid stench of singed hair, it hit me. What the hell is she cooking, I wondered. We sat in terrified silence, and in the distance we could hear the waves raging and booming against the cliff face. And then a knock at our door. We both jumped. Mrs. Lycos stood in our doorway. She had dressed up in another black dress, and around her neck was this ancient-looking amulet. The evil eye. I hope she isn't part of that church. I thought about those bloody entrails we saw, and my heart began to race. Your dinner is ready, my children, she gushed. Our hostess was in high spirits. She had a circle of rouge on each cheek, and the foundation beneath the rouge had caked into these lines on her face. She looked like a dirty porcelain doll that had been dropped and shattered. Now we pray, yes? She reached out her two arms, the skin hanging from her bones like mottled fruit. Her hand felt like clammy bones in mine. Her grip, though, was surprisingly strong, her yellow nails pinching into the flesh of my palm. And the prayer was long and in this thick, accented Greek that my 5th grade vocab just could not follow. And finally, she opened her eyes and she pulled off the lid of the main dish with a flourish. It's my mama's recipe, she gushed. In the round silver bowl lay a saucy mystery of meat in small slivers. She must have undercooked it somewhat because there were trails of red blood in the somewhat gelatinous gray sauce. Lengua, she said. A traditional Greek dish. And then she opened the second dish, where a small trussed ham lay dotted with cloves. And now the ham. She was so excited. Her lipstick had smeared on her lips and her mouth was moist with strings of saliva. She dished us up these massive plates, and as we sat in front of them, I wondered if Janie felt as sick to her stomach as I did. The old crone watched us intently, chewing her own food furiously in great speared forkfuls, and 2 thin trails of pinkish blood trailed down the deep wrinkles of her mouth. And she stopped chewing suddenly, and she pointed to the meat on our plates. Why you don't eat my meat? It is special meat for a special occasion. I made it for you. You don't like?" she asked, and her voice had this harsh edge to it. I fought down my revulsion and I took just a tiny forkful of that meat while Janie mirrored me by my side. The taste was sweet and slightly rancid, and then I swallowed it hard to get the piece down, and Janie gagged next to me, spitting the small portion into her grimy serviette. "You don't like the meat? I made it special." The old lady started shrieking. She was suddenly angry. These small flecks of meaty spittle flew from her mouth. "You will eat what I have put in front of you. You will eat it," she was screaming, rising from her chair opposite of Janie. I had had enough of this. This is crazy, I was thinking. I stood up from the table and I took Janie's hand. "Thanks for the dinner, Mrs. Lycos, but we are leaving now," I told her. She leaped to her feet and she started shouting in Greek at the top of her lungs. It was like she was being attacked. I was afraid that she was calling out to the darkened streets for help and who might respond out there. "Watch her, okay? Just watch her and I'll get our stuff," I told Janie, who was now frozen with fright at the other side of the table. I scrambled to our room and I grabbed our backpacks. My heart was jumping out of my chest with fear. And as I left the room, I heard a gah sound coming from the opposite end of the house. It was these frantic grunts that were turning into these pain squeals. There's something else in this house, I thought. I wanted to run, but that person sounded like they were in terrible pain, so I had to see if I could at least help them. I forced myself down the dark hall to the last room. There was a slide bolt on the outside of the door, and I strained to pull back that rusted bolt, and I stepped into that room. I held out my phone light in the foul-smelling blackness. What I saw, it was a vision that will play itself out in my nightmares for the rest of my life. That room was small and damp, and 100 iron crosses leaked red rust from the walls. There was only a bucket and a shabby cot at the end of the room. A man was struggling in the cot, and it was a filthy blanket had fallen next to his bed. He was young, with matted blonde hair and wide blue eyes run through with red veins. His body was strapped down in thick leather straps to greasy, blood-stained sheets. He had worked his one hand free, and he gestured wildly to the floor next to his bed, and I stepped closer and I saw that he had written something in blood. It said, "I'm American, help me." I looked up to his face, and his open mouth strained wide open. Instead of a tongue was a butchered root. It was black with clotted blood. His legs showed a fresh, puckered burn covering a square hunk of meat, the perfect size for a roast. I stumbled back from the bed, my mouth dry with fear. Janie, I thought suddenly, and I rushed through the hall to the grimy kitchen, and that old lady was still screaming, her voice grating like nails on a board. She had Janie by her hair, beating at her with her blue-veined fist. I knocked the old lady down to the floor in a tumble of skirts. She cursed and she screamed as I grabbed Janie and I pulled her into the dark street. We ran through the steep cobbled maze, our feet barely keeping to the ground. When we reached that small jetty, I began to untie one of the smaller boats with an outboard motor, and we jumped inside and we made our way into the dark, seething ocean. And behind us, this small town began to suddenly light up. People were moving down the streets in groups. We made our way into the night and away from that cursed place. On March 22nd, in 2023, the tour company Sal's Ferries found 2 American tourists floating in a fishing boat off the coast of Delos. Janie Mitchell, 19, and Ray Silver, 20, were severely dehydrated and in a state of shock. They recounted their ordeal to the Mykonos Police Department, which opened an investigation. Commander A released a statement claiming, As of yet, their investigative team found no port that matched the couple's description in Santorini, nor the neighboring islands. But several tourists have gone missing around those islands over the years. Legends abound regarding the ancient cult of Dionysus, which reveled in human sacrifice and blood rituals. Some older locals say that the Tavros cult still exists. So if you are vacationing in Greece, beware of that bull sign, or you may end up an unwilling sacrifice to the hungry Dionysus. But what do you think? Have you ever been to Santorini or Greece? Have you ever heard of these hidden cults there? Let us know your stories in the comments below. And when you're a member of our channel, you'll get personal replies from me for every single comment you make. And for more scary horror stories, please subscribe.